Hello, you're very welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan. It is the 31st of August 2023, and I am delighted to say that after 3 long, lonely weeks, with the help of Connor Fitzgerald and Neve and others, we got through it. But she's back. Sarah, how are you?
She's back. Yes, I'm good. How are you, John?
I am good. Did you die of the heat in Greece?
No, it was 32, something like that.
Because back 3 weeks ago when you were heading off to Greece, I mean, I was legitimately afraid for your life. I was watching Róisín News or watching other people watching Róisín News, and I thought, good Lord in heaven, this woman's going to come back in an urn to me. But no, you're back in one piece. You had a great time.
It was hot. Don't get me wrong, but it was fine. We had a ball. We had a great time. There was an earthquake one morning when we were having breakfast. There was a level 5 or whatever it was.
A 5 on the Richter scale earthquake. What's that like? Yeah. Like, do you not, if it's early in the morning and the ground starts shaking, do you not just kind of think that you might be drunk? Like, does it start wobbling under your feet? Like, what? I've never experienced an earthquake. Tell us about that.
All right, so it's my second. So
you're a veteran.
I'm a veteran. Yeah, I was in that earthquake in Peru years ago. The thing that surprises me about an earthquake is I always imagined before I was in one that you would just be sitting there and then it would just start shaking immediately, like go from 0 to the whatever the level is. But it's not really like that. It kind of starts like a rumbling. Mm-hmm. So my sister was sitting in front of me in this cafe that we were in having breakfast, and she described it really well, that it kind of feels like there's a big truck rumbling up behind you at the beginning. You're like, what is this? Like, where is this coming from? And then you realize like the tables start to shake and everything starts to shake in front of you, whatever. But it's kind of slow. And it wasn't that bad. Like, it wasn't half as bad as the one I was in Peru. But the problem is because it's slow coming, you don't really know how bad it's going to get, if you know what I mean. And obviously this time, like, I had the kids with me, we were sitting in this kind of outdoor area, but it had a canopy above. So like everybody leaves, like everybody gets up from the tables and everybody leaves from the restaurant and walks out into the middle of the road. Like, there's no hanging around. But the kids are very excited to be able to go back to school, tell people they're in an earthquake. So
yeah, I would be too. That. Like, I would have dined out on that when I was a kid. I would have dined on that for months. Well, when I was in an earthquake, yeah. Mighty.
My oldest, like, he's in first class, and he said they went back and the teacher was like, oh, tell us about your summer. And he was like, and everybody was colouring, and then everybody had to tell something about their summer. And then I said I was in an earthquake, and he was like, and everybody stopped colouring and listened to me. And I was like, I'd say they did, yeah.
Yeah, that would have happened. Yeah.
But it was great. But they're back in school, and I'm very excited about that, and so are they. But it's this weird nightmare thing where I have one child. I'm sure any parent who's listening understands this. I have one child in first class, one child just started junior infants. Junior infants do a staggered start. So they don't start at 10 to 9 with the rest of the school. They start at 9:30 and they finish at 11:30. So I have a drop off at 10 to 9, a drop off at 9:30, a collection at 11:30, and a collection at 1. Because even though my older son is going up to 2:15, they're staggering their times in as well. So I'm just back and forth to the school all day. It's completely absurd. Like, luckily I'm at home, but if you had a job, I don't know what you would be doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, a lot of schools
so people are like, oh, they're back to school. I'm like, yeah, they're not really though. And this goes on until the 18th of September. Yeah, it's not like it's 2 days.
Yeah, I don't know much about primary schools, but my wife obviously is a teacher in a post primary school, and they've had an official timetable all week, but then different groups in at different times, and it's a bit chaotic for the first week or two, and seems to go on longer, obviously, when the kids are younger as well. So, yeah, rather you than me. Anyway, have you noticed anything interesting in the news while you've been away? Because this is a podcast about the news, and I wanted to ask you, because you're the very woman to ask, what you made of the old Boundary Commission.
First of all...
Well, it's not called the Boundary Commission anymore. It's called the Electoral Commission.
We'll get to that in a second. But I didn't really watch that much news while I was away. And then when I opened my phone a couple of days ago, I see this article saying that some senior consultant has come out and said that the new Children's Hospital won't see its first patient until 2030.
Oh, good Lord.
So... previously on this podcast, John, we discussed how the idea was floated for a children's hospital when we were born, the year you or I were born, something like that.
Yes,
And
yes.
we never got to see it. And now, because my oldest son is 7 in 3 weeks, like in 7 more years, he'll be 14. So he'll be too old for the children's hospital.
Yeah, it's
So
remarkable.
it will be 2 generations later. And also, if they're saying that now, I always have this deep suspicion about kicked out dates, that a kicked out date like that never comes forward and usually goes back. Do you know what I mean?
It really is astonishing. And I mean, it is on even now today, even though it's years away from opening, it is the most expensive medical facility in the history of humankind. Not in the history of Ireland, not in the history of Europe, in the history of humankind. Our species has never poured more resources into a healthcare facility than into this children's hospital. And it has been going on. It was first mooted in the early 1980s, first planned in 1991. The Death Star didn't take this long to build.
Yeah. But even if you just take the project in, like, as a project now, to me, it's just so deeply concerning that there doesn't seem to be, like, first of all, there should be a very obvious face of the project, and there isn't. I know there's a Minister for Health and whatever, but there just doesn't seem to be a really obvious person. And second of all, there doesn't seem to be anybody willing to put their name or their reputation or their voice to any serious final budget figure or final date. And that is very, very worrying.
Tell you what, it's brilliant for you. Imagine if you're the contractors. Brilliant. Because no one told you. I mean, these guys have a license to print money as far as I can see. Because there's, and I'm not naming the contractors and I'm not saying anything negative about them, and I'm sure they're operating to the highest standards of integrity. But if they decided not to, there isn't a whole lot of people out there in government who are openly saying, this is my project and I'm holding people to account to make sure it's delivered on time. There's nobody. So it's a license to print money. If you were so inclined. And obviously I'm not saying that the contractors involved are or would be. But from a governance point of view, that's obviously a risk.
But also, again, it's not printing money because it's our money. It's the public's money. Like, it's just... I don't really even know, like what you even do now with this, because, you're kind of so far down the line. How do you turn it around? But I think if it's 1.7 billion already, and the first patient isn't potentially until 2030, and it's not built yet, and it's this and it's that.
So people are very vulnerable. Like, you're familiar with sunk cost fallacy, I presume.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, people are very vulnerable to sunk cost fallacy, which is the idea that, well, we've spent 1.7 billion on it now. We've spent that much money. We have to finish it. Therefore, we'll spend another 3 billion. I mean, the 1.7 billion is gone. It's finished. You're never getting it back. The only question really in front of you that remains is, are we really going to spend another 3 billion to get this thing done by 2030, or will we just abandon it and do something a little bit more sensible? Politicians can't abandon it because that would be to admit that you'd wasted 1.7 billion. But if this was in the private sector, if this was some multinational company who was bogged down in a project like this, there would be a conversation going on in a boardroom somewhere about whether or not this project is just cursed and we just pull the plug on it and write the losses off as a tax loss. That's what they do. But because politics is politics and people, will never live it down to election time, they just have to plow on. And if it gets to 2050 and eventually opens, so be it. But they have to keep pouring money into it now. Otherwise, they'd admit they were wrong. That's
but also say nothing for the kind of opportunity costs, like the resources, the attention, the time, like the other things that could have been done. I mean, by the time this is over, you'd really, really be able to, I think you'd be able to make a very strong case against something like the Metro North, and say that we're not a country that is really, capable, unless we're hiring a kind of a project manager or a skill set in from another country, or having somebody, recruited from abroad to manage this. We don't have the skill set internally to do this.
I spent more time than usual this year abroad, in various cities, and nearly every city I go to, at Barcelona, Paris, Berlin, like this year that I've been in, have had underground systems, or metros. And every time, like I don't usually use them, but I was in Barcelona recently. I used the metro an awful lot to go from A to B to C. And I was just thinking every time I was on it, like in Ireland, we just couldn't do this. You could, I mean, the Port Tunnel, people remember the Port Tunnel. How long did the Port Tunnel take? Was it 10, 15 years or something for a relatively straightforward piece of road? I don't know where you would begin with a project like the Metro North, in terms of the planning objections there'd be, the cost overruns. No, you're right. It's just something that I don't know how anyone could have any faith in this government or this state carrying out big infrastructure projects at the moment, while this farce is ongoing. So that's...
I don't know. I like like, put it this way. I try not to think about it because, like, I kind of, like I said, I didn't really pay that much attention to Irish news when I was abroad. There was a couple of things that I wanted to watch, actually, which I'll get to in a minute. There was a couple of like long interviews. Candace Owens interviewed Andrew Tate. It's like 3.5 hours. I watched that and a couple of other things that I'd wanted to get to. But if I thought too much about the Children's Hospital particularly, and I hate this word, but I find it kind of triggering. So I just, it's best not to think about it.
Right. Well, I'm going to go off script because we were scheduled to talk about the boundaries. We will in a second. But I saw Candace Owens doing a 3-hour-long interview with Andrew Tate, and I didn't watch it, and I have no intention of watching it because it's 3.5 hours of my life I'm not going to get back. But you were interested, and you did watch it. What did you think?
So you and I have brought up the subject of Andrew Tate has come up on this podcast before, and I remember I was actually saying it to Keith afterwards. I remember saying it's not even worth mentioning. Like, he's not worth talking about. He's like just, the lowest specimen of like, he's kind of the most misogynistic kind of like he's a manifestation of what people, I believe, lots of left-leaning feminists try to pretend Jordan Peterson is when he isn't. But I was kind of curious because I do like Candace Owens now. I think Candace Owens has kind of gone a bit mad on the whole anti-vax scene, and like there's been a few things in the last while that she's kind of a bit, I don't know, she can be a bit mean, and I don't. We've discussed that as well before. I don't like people being cruel to people, but anyway. But anyway, I do like a lot of Candace Owens stuff that Candace Owens talks about or whatever. And I thought this is interesting, and I watched it. I have to say, I came away from it with a slightly different view of him. And I think that I think that a lot of the stuff you see is very old. And she was able to kind of establish in the interview, like, like I'd seen videos of him talking about different things. And he was like, yeah, but these videos are when I was 23, 24. Like, I'm not going to say sorry. Actually, he made some interesting points about that, which we can actually get to on another topic we're talking about later. But he said, am I embarrassed about the things I said and did? Yeah, of course I am, but I'm not going to apologize because it is what it is, and I don't believe in apologizing for things that got me to where I am, and and I've grown up since. I came away from it thinking that he is a guy who is, I still think he's very angry, and I think that he's like, he talks a lot about his upbringing and his dad, and there's a lot going on there, I think. But I think he's a guy who has, basically what I would say is, he has the foundation of some interesting ideas about things, but he hasn't done the work yet and thinking them through enough. But he might get there. And one thing that I thought was that I thought was interesting, in that I did come away from the interview with a sense that he does understand that he has quite a lot of following of young males, and he does take that responsibility quite seriously. So I think he's 34, whatever he is. I think he's bright. I think he's quite immature in a lot of the things he thinks. But I think that there's some semblance there of a person who might develop, like, he's capable of changing his thinking about things. He's capable of developing a deeper understanding of things. I think a bit of work thinking. He could get to be, have some quite interesting ideas. He's thinking. I mean, I always say, I just hate one of the things I hate about a lot of the people who are the loudest voices in politics these days is, and on Twitter, and on a lot of like the tougher subjects, is that they really haven't done a lot of thinking. They haven't changed their mind about anything ever. They're very absolute. Like I see such people sometimes talk about hard topics, and I almost envy their certainty. They're just so certain about everything, and they've been right about this subject since they were 14. Well, God Almighty, John. I mean, I've changed my mind about lots of things, and I think that and one should, and continue to do so. I'm not talking about completely fundamentally changing everything you think, but like really developing your understanding or developing your thinking takes a change of mind, a change of heart, whatever.
Well,
and so this is a guy who's doing that, and I think that that's kind of interesting to watch.
I think it's funny you said he's 34, and I'm thinking because I'm 5-6 years older than him, and you know, I personally feel like I'm a vastly more rounded adult than I was 5 or 6 years ago. And I'd say when I was 34, I considered myself, I mean, because you know what they say about men and women, like you guys, you mature quite young, you know, 24, 25, 26 years old. Women are like, you know, actually mature adults, whereas men, we mature at a different rate. You know, some of us get to the middle 50s and we're still learning to be adults. And that's not to infantilize us as men. I don't mean that in even a particularly jocular way, but my experience certainly has been that as you grow older, you just like everything about you settles down. You become just a more settled person.
But I think that as you get older, and like there's lots of topics that are, you know, I would have thought of in very black and white terms when I was in my 20s, and you know, possibly even into my early 30s, that I have realized with time that, you know, like life is complicated. And let's say, for example, extramarital affairs, right? I would have been very, very black and white on that in my 20s. I would have been like, that's wrong. People who do that, they're this, they're that, whatever. And now I've had friends over the years that I've seen get themselves into situations, and I've realized that like, maybe life's not as like adult relationships and marriages that are 25 years old aren't as simple as I thought they were. And it's complicated, and like, it's not really for me to, you know, like, I mean, obviously we all judge people and you try not to, but you do, and you know, whatever. But like, I think as you get older, you develop a more of an understanding that most things aren't black and white. And the topics that we talk about, whether they're political or social or whatever, are probably like the ones that are still talked about 10 and 15 and 20 years later are still talked about because they're hard, because they're complicated, because they're not black and white. And like, I see this guy, and he's interesting because he's not a conservative. I mean, he has, like, he talks about this in the interview, like, I didn't realize this, but he has multiple children. He didn't say how many, by multiple different women. And he's like, oh, conservatives, you know, I'm not really conservative, but I'm becoming more conservative. And then he talked about being a libertarian, and I thought it was so interesting because she was like, "But being libertarian is like it's a cop out, because the live and let live is like just a way that people has been weaponized. It's been taken over, and now, you know, people are using that as a way to indoctrinate children and into this, that, and whatever." And like, it was just a really kind of fascinating conversation where she was saying to him, you should be a conservative, and he was saying, well, you know, I'm starting to think maybe the institution of marriage, I used to say, oh, it's a load of crap and I would never get married, and he's like, and now, you know, maybe I'm starting to change my mind about it. It was just it's too long, and I was on the flight, and just by some absolute miracle of the gods, the two of my children fell asleep for the majority of the flight home, and so I had the time to watch it then on the plane. I downloaded it onto my phone, but it's very, very long, but it is interesting, and I changed my mind.
I haven't watched it. My take on Tate has always been that I think he has something valuable to say about men. I think he has something. I mean, there's a reason why so many young men are following him, right? There's a definite sense out there of sort of lost masculinity, or a lost role for masculinity in society. No objection to any of that stuff. Jordan Peterson also does it reasonably well. It's not really my cup of tea, but I think there's value in it. But with Tate, it's always been, and I don't want to sound like a white knight because I'm very far from one, but is the way he has spoke about women in his youth, for me, just I've known guys like that, and they're bad news. That's my view.
Yeah, well, I think what I took away from and I agree with you, but I think what I took away from the interview is a sense that he might be realizing that, like, evolving out of that, or has evolved out of that a bit. And it remains to be seen whether that's genuine or whether that's whatever. But I know what you mean. But I think you're like that kind of like space for, men to be told that it's okay to be men isn't for all men. But there is a lot of men who are really lost, and it helps them. And Jordan Peterson is the same.
Yeah, I mean, there's something.
And
I'm a man I've actually always more enjoyed the company of women than the company of men. I don't know. My wife would say she's somebody who's always enjoyed the company of men more than the company of women. But I think there are a lot of blokes who really value sort of like what you call blokey culture. Going to the pub with the lads, watching the match stuff, which has never really been my thing. And I think there are a lot of young guys who sort of feel like they're missing out on that kind of male only space to be manly in, or whatever it is they do. So yeah.
Well, I think it's not. I don't even think it's just the space. I think that there's just been this correlation made, or somewhere along the line. This has just been, a correlation made between. That's a lot of the kind of behaviors and the, not even behaviors, but like the things that we would have said were intrinsically male have now been interlinked with being intrinsically bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so like there's there's nothing wrong with men wanting to go out and do whatever, like, any more than there's anything wrong with women who want, like, but women who want to sit around in a circle and have a book club and drink loads of wine is now way more acceptable than a group of men who want to go out and, like, watch MMA fighting and drink pints. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's something, it's been made toxic, and I think that a lot of men find that difficult, and these people like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson are kind of are offering some kind of reassurance on that. And look, I'm a woman, that's not for me to say, but I thought it was an interesting interview. I think that she's an interesting person, he's an interesting person, and the fact that they sat down together was definitely something for me.
It ties in very closely, before we move on, to a conversation that Conor Fitzgerald and I had on this show last week in your absence, where he's got a piece up about how, like, what he kind of calls the medicalization of masculinity, where you've got all these sort of female authors writing pieces like "What's wrong with men?" Or "How can we help our men?" Or there's and he says men aren't really interested in the answer to that question. It's a conversation that's being driven almost entirely by female writers, particularly in the UK.
But like, imagine if like, David Quinn and a group of other male writers in the Irish Times were writing articles about what's wrong with women.
Yeah.
Like, what are we to do? Right? What business? Like, I don't know. It just, there's so much reverse, like, sexism. It's like an outward hostility towards men. It's just depressing.
Well,
but anyway, go on.
We'll come back to it. Let's talk a little bit, because we said we would, about the Electoral Commission and its redrawing of the electoral boundaries. We're getting more politicians, Sarah. That's good news. But you think that it's bad news for some of the sitting politicians, I gather.
Yeah. Well, first of all, fundamentally, I think three-seaters are bad for politics. I don't think they work particularly well, and I think that and it's not just for all the because of the small but we like small parties or whatever, but like we have,
well, for those who don't know, right, just because we have some people who don't know, the issue with three-seaters is the fewer the seats, the more votes you have to get elected. That sounds obvious, but it's really not, because it's supposed to be a proportional system. But in a three-seater, essentially you need 25% of the vote to be guaranteed to take a seat, and in a five-seater you only need 12.5% of the vote to take a seat. So in a constituency with three seats, I mean, it really does hurt, and like, smaller parties complain about this, but it really does hurt smaller parties and independents, which is one of the reasons why the bigger parties, I think, love those three-seaters, because it's very easy.
But also, like, in the course of our, like, lifetime, or our time that we've been kind of paying attention to politics, we've the amount of parties that are, like, reasonably, let's say, to be kind, contesting seats has grown. So it's not just Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and then maybe Labour, maybe, it's Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Greens, Labour, Sinn Féin, possibly People Before Profit, and others. And so the reality of it is that maybe people who are listening don't know this, but most of the time, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil will run two people with absolutely no expectation whatsoever of getting a second seat, purely because they need the transfers to push the first person over the line. But ultimately, what you're talking about in those situations is absolutely no chance whatsoever, unless they're really high profile, like Eamon Ryan or whatever, of agreeing potentially a Labour person or a People Before Profit or whatever getting elected. And I think that lots of constituencies, I think it's bad for politics. Three-seaters, apart from the numbers, they're clunky, and they're bad for politics. And what it means is that parties will barely bother contesting in those constituencies. And what that ends up meaning for people locally is, and I think it's well established on this podcast that I'm not a Green voter, but I'm just using the Greens as an example of, potentially a constituency ending up with no representation whatsoever on the Greens or whoever it might be, because a three-seater just is never, ever, ever going to happen for them.
Yep.
So personally, I think three-seaters. So I live in a constituency which used to be called Fingal and is now called Fingal West and Fingal East or some such nonsense, which has gone from a 5-seater to 2 3-seaters. And I think that is terrible news for some of the incumbent people. And there's other constituencies where the same thing has happened. And, a lot of people, especially in a constituency that Fingal used to be, and fine, Fingal is extremely big. For people who don't know, it's Malahide, it's Portmarnock, but it's Rush and Skerries and Donabate. It goes all the way up into the North County. It's huge. So I can appreciate that it needed to be changed or whatever. But a lot of people get elected based on the fact that they feature in all of the boxes across the entire constituency. And with the constituencies being split, they're in trouble. And, our local Fianna Fáil, Darragh O'Brien, he's very, very, very popular in Malahide, so he'll stick in that side of the constituency, and I don't think he'll have any problem getting elected in a 3-seater. But, Duncan Smith from Labour, for example, who, again, very established, I'm not a Labour voter, but I like Duncan very much. I think he's a very good TD.
Yeah, he's a great constituency worker, to be fair, Duncan Smith.
He's a very, very good constituency worker. He's very bright. He's everything that a Labour politician needs to be to get elected. I think especially in a constituency like this, he's young, he's a family guy, he's from the area, he's of the area, he works very hard on the ground.
You sound like you're writing his obituary, though. You think he's in trouble, is what you're saying.
I'm not writing his obituary. I would hate to see him lose a seat, honestly, because I think he's a good politician. I think he's wrong about literally every single thing he thinks, but that's fine.
I have a sneaky feeling. But Duncan, if you're listening, I have a sneaky feeling you're in with a shot of a transfer here.
Anyway,
I've been mourning
it's
myself.
Bad news for him.
I've been mourning myself, Sarah, because I've been deprived. I've been shorn. My TD has been ripped from my loving arms. Poor Matty McGrath. He shall no longer have my vote because he is now in Tipperary South and I am in Tipperary North riding. I have no idea who I'll vote for here. Didn't have to think about it before.
My God.
Just Matty number 1. That was all I had to do. Now I'm going to have to research them, figure out if there's somebody acceptable to vote for. It's terrible.
Sorry, here I am talking about Duncan. I didn't realise there was a real tragedy happening.
Exactly.
As a result, it's like some kind of romantic end to a beautiful political love story.
It is. It's terrible. I'd say that's something. I sometimes people think when I talk about voting for Matty McGrath that I'm in some way mocking him or making a joke of it. I'm absolutely not. I voted for him proudly, and I would vote for him proudly again the next time. Not because, and I say this, not because I have any belief that he's the world's greatest legislator or anything like that, but I vote for him because he doesn't give a feck what people think of him, and he says what he thinks on the topics of the day, and he's not interested in, getting approval from the right kind of people. That's why I voted for him. Because like he's got an attitude that I think everyone should aspire to have, in terms of just be yourself, say what you think, and let the chips fall where they may. That's why I voted for him, and that's why I'm sorry I won't have the chance to do it the next time. So hopefully there's somebody else.
I like Matty as well. I always have. I think he's straight. Like, he thinks what he thinks, and
yeah.
like,
By the way, I
shouldn't-
disagree with him half the time. Like, and sometimes he goes a bit
That's
too far on
fine.
issues for my taste. But I don't
That's
care.
fine. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine. Like, but like he has a particular viewpoint on things, and he says it, and like that shouldn't be the exception, but unfortunately it is. But he's not in any, like, obviously not in any electoral trouble there, is he? He's just
No, he should be
going one
fine.
way
He
and
should
you're
be
going.
fine. I think I was like the only vote he got in North Tipperary the last time. His base is very much in the south of the county. Obviously, I wasn't the only one, but like I think in my local box, I was lucky because I think I promised him, I said, you're getting 2 votes in our local box, and I think he got 2 votes in our local box. So like if we hadn't shown up on the day, he wouldn't know.
Oh, that's happened to me, and yeah. I'm not actually gonna. I'll tell you that all after the podcast. But no, I don't. I don't think it's like, I think the Electoral Commission and the way they've carved it up there, or whatever they're called, is not great for the likes of Duncan Smith. I think he could hang in there. I'd have to look at the numbers like in more detail, but it's not great, and it's not particularly fair. And I think that there's a lot of people who will, suffer as a result. And, I don't know. Like, overall, I think that the next time there's an election, you'll really see like what kind of impact. Like, there's no way of calling it until it's actually happened. But
Well,
I think that there's a lot of kind of poking and prodding going around along. Like, this is just another iteration of people sticking their oar into things. We'll see.
the flip side is there are going to be more TDs. It's going from 165 to I think 179. So there's 14 extra seats. So like you would think the parties would be able to jiggle things around so that everyone who's currently a sitting TD gets a constituency to run in that they have a fair chance of. I mean, obviously that won't be possible in all cases, but I mean that does balance it out a little bit. 14 extra seats in the next Dáil are up for grabs. So there's going to be some very ambitious county councillors, at least in various parts of the country, thinking that they're quids in, particularly if they're in North Wexford or South Wicklow, which has become the country's
But it won't
most
matter
talked about.
because
Go ahead.
all the parties are in serious trouble when it comes to finding women. So, that's going to be the main, like I can see certain situations where I can name a couple actually, where there are sitting councillors who've been there for a long time, who have who are men who have a good chance. And
well, if you are one
won't
of
get
those
it.
ambitious men and you're listening to this podcast, my advice is toddle yourself down now to the births, deaths, and marriages offices. Go in and ask for what's called a gender recognition form. Change yourself over. Become legally a woman. It's just a stroke of a pen. That's all you need to do, and you'll be top of the ticket.
Someone's going to do that, John.
I have privately advised several smaller parties to do it, just for the publicity. Obviously, it's a big thing to ask anyone to do, but I mean, it's one of those things where it would, of course, be in full compliance with the law. I mean, it would make a mockery of the law, but it would also be in full compliance with the law if they were to say, well, actually, we've got 5 women now who were previously men until yesterday. I mean, because
But maybe you need to, like, sometimes you need to make a mockery of the law to like prove a point. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, and also it's not really doing anything big if you don't believe it. If you know what I mean? Like, it's like people,
I mean, you're fully free to come out and say, you're free to come out and say, I'm still a man. I believe I'm a man, but the law says I get a better chance of being allowed to be a candidate if I'm a woman, so therefore I'm a woman. I mean, like, it's you're obviously not changing who you are. That's the whole point. Simply changing your legal recognition. Anyway, I get flayed for that.
Well, onto another subject then. Róisín Murphy, will you apologise when you get flayed for that?
I will not.
Yeah.
The Róisín Murphy story this week. I actually thought it was I saw something this morning. These stories don't normally make me angry. This one made me angry. Not that Róisín Murphy said what she said. And by the way, if you don't know, if you lived under a rock, Róisín Murphy, joint lead singer with Moloko. She sang a song, I suppose Sing It Back. It was sort of a dance hit. I can't sing, Sarah. So if you look up Sing It Back on YouTube, you'll know who I'm talking about. She was, but apart from that, she's also a 50-year-old mammy these days, and she's on Facebook like a lot of 50-year-old mammies. And she commented on somebody's post on Facebook about puberty blockers, and she said puberty blockers are fucked. That's the word she used. She said they're messing with vulnerable kids, and they shouldn't be allowed to happen. And this went nuclear. It was picked up by a guy called Aidan Comerford, who's a really demented guy on the internet somewhere. All he does all day is post about trans issues, even though I don't think he's trans himself. I don't know what's in with him. What's up with him? And of course, this drew an international mob down on her head because she's in the arts. And the poor woman issued a groveling apology and said that she wouldn't speak on the issue ever again. But that's not what made me angry, Sarah. What made me angry was her record label announced this morning that they would no longer promote her new album, and all proceeds from the sales of her new album will be donated, or at least their share will be donated, to trans rights charities. And I just thought, how dare you? How dare you treat somebody who you have a duty of care to like that? It's an absolute outrage, as far as I'm concerned. That you sign a contract with a company, they have a duty of care to you. Like, how dare they treat you like that? All she did was air a perfectly legal opinion that's shared by a majority of the population.
The level of cowardice is just
on her behalf or theirs?
On theirs. It's really depressing, because there was a while there, I think I said it on the podcast, where I felt like things were changing, that there was a kind of a shift, and seeing that would make you think, like, it's 1984 stuff, John. Like she said that puberty blockers shouldn't be used on little kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I genuinely believe that the majority of people agree with that. Puberty blockers, I don't want to get too much into the detail, but like, if you give puberty blockers to a little boy and then he changes his mind later, which, by the way, they do, his life is ruined. I'm not going to get into the details of why, but his voice will never develop. Like, his life is ruined.
There are other bits of him that will never develop either. He'll have a micro penis for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Like, let's just spell it out for people. If you give them to a girl, she will be infertile for the rest of her life. Her sexual organs will never develop properly as they should. I mean, you're condemning people to a lifetime of misery. And by the way, if they complete the transition, let nobody pretend that, like, living in a body surgically altered to the opposite sex is a day at the beach. It's not. Like, it's a horrible thing that you're doing, people.
And also, we have absolutely no idea of the medical, like, people talk about the health implications of the COVID vaccine. Like, we have no idea what the long-term potential, like, let's say, for argument's sake, maybe your puberty being blocked like that kind of hormonal thing could cause anything. We could find out in 20 years. Cancer, I don't know. Never mind the psychological damage. Like, there are entire groups dedicated to people who detransition, who don't want to do this anymore. Like, so if people want to do what they want to do when they're adults, okay, we can talk about that. But under 18, and if you let them, like, they market it like it's either a choice between these children killing themselves or getting the puberty blockers, and that is not true.
Yeah. And by the way, when you say under 18, you're underselling it, because, like, that's 16, 17, you're past puberty. These things are being given in many jurisdictions to kids 10, 11, 12. That's where they're being used. Like, and those kids are being asked to make a decision at that stage about stuff they can't possibly conceive of. I mean, no 12-year-old can possibly understand the implications of you'll never be able to have kids. There are grown adult people of my own age and your age, Sarah, who get to our age and that maybe, like me, they haven't had kids, and they they suddenly realize, oh my God, I've missed out on such an important part of life. And we're asking kids to make that decision at 12 years old and giving them drugs that make it irreversible and calling it healthcare. I mean, I don't curse on this podcast, but I mean, it infuriates me, and it should infuriate everybody, I think. And then the one woman who said, well, no, she's not the one woman, but a woman who on her private Facebook page makes this comment, has it dug up by a creep. And then her community, the arts community, turns on her and she's forced to recant. I mean, 1984 doesn't do it justice. It's through the looking glass stuff.
I think that, and that was what I was saying earlier on about Andrew Tate, and it was interesting. Like, I really agreed with him on this, even though I've seen the videos that he's talking about women or whatever, and but his, not getting into the detail of that, but his entire description of like not saying sorry was a good one. Like, I think that she should not apologize. She should not apologize for saying something that lots of people think. And even if it was only what she thought, she's reinforcing the idea that people can be bullied into submission, that their lives can be ruined, that their career can be cancelled if they say the wrong thing. They're so incensed still that they couldn't do that to J.K. Rowling because she's too rich and too powerful.
Yeah,
like they can't stand that she's untouchable. And fair play to her for standing her ground and saying, no, I'm not going to. And people have these ideas of like, oh well, like, they think they're on the right side of everything or whatever. But like, and people talk about, it's very popular now to talk about bullying, like all the LGBT thing and all, and trans anti-bullying. They're bullies. This is bullying. They've bullied this woman into silence. That's what they want. This is bullying.
It's
and she should not apologize. And I don't know her,
but
her
it's
career,
too late.
her life situation, whatever. But like, I just think like, never, like, just people need to just
this
stand strong and just stop saying sorry to this.
This is why
if you have the belief that it's wrong to give puberty blockers to children, which I do, you say it and you don't say sorry.
This is why I'm so annoyed about the record company dropping her, doing whatever it did. Because why did she apologize? I suspect, I do not know this, but I would suggest that something like this may have happened. That somebody may have phoned her and said, "This is really bad. We've got a new record coming out. We need this, make this controversy go away. You need to apologize." And so she did. And then as soon as you apologize, you're done for. I mean, this is the worst thing. Apologies now are surrenders. They're not apologies. They're not, I am genuinely sorry. It is raising the white flag, because you're immediately cut off from all the people who actually supported you, because you can't accept their support anymore. Otherwise, your apology wasn't genuine. You are also vulnerable to all those people who say that your apology wasn't good enough, or, if you were really apologetic, you'd say something else, or maybe you need to go for re-education. And thirdly, it's admission of liability. So your record company, your record company can turn around and say, well, actually, you know what? No, we can't deal with you anymore now that you've apologized. Even if somebody had said to her, well, you need to apologize or else the record company will dump you. It's such a strategic error these days to apologize, which is a terrible place to be in the world. But it's just a terrible mistake. If you believe...
But it comes back to that point as well that we were talking about earlier on, which is that, like, like often, this isn't the case, this is a recent thing, but often people are being expected to apologize about things they might have said a long time ago. And that was the point that Andrew Tate was saying, that like, we shouldn't like reinforce this idea that you should issue groveling apologies for things that you said when you were 24, because like evolving your thinking is like, you shouldn't be cancelled for growing. You know what I mean? You shouldn't be you shouldn't have your whole life ruined because you evolved your thinking from 10 years ago. But this is what they want.
I can speak of personal experience. And Paddy Cosgrave tried to do this to me 2 years ago on Christmas Eve, when he dug up a whole load of tweets from 2008, 2009, 2012, like out of context, no surrounding. These were all parts of conversations, and said, you said X, Y, and Z. And I refuse to apologize. I've never apologized, because number one, most of them were harmless. Number two, the ones that looked like they weren't harmless were actually harmless if you read them in context. And number three, it wasn't an intention. There was no intention to make me into a better person. The intention was to destroy somebody who disagrees with you. And that's the case. That's what happens. So, you know, I feel so sorry for this woman, because do you know what the difference is? I mean, I am an activist and a commentator, and I am in the arena to some extent. This woman was commenting on her private Facebook page, and she was taken aback by a storm, and the support didn't really get to her quick enough. That's what happened. I mean, if there had been people who'd been able to speak to her sooner, I don't think she would have apologized. But unfortunately, she made this mistake, and now she's going to have to live with it. And the apology is going to be much more damaging for her than the thing that she said. That's the reality.
The shame.
It is.
And then the next person who's, you know, is in any kind of vulnerable position career wise, about to release a book, about to release whatever, will be too afraid to say anything. That's what it's designed to do. She's gone. It's not about her anymore.
Yeah,
it's about making sure that the next
out,
person. Yeah. Like, and it's first of all, it's bullying, but it is like the stuff of 1984. It's just like, and now, you know, moving on, we have this fabulous new organization, our state organization, that will tell us, that will protect our right to not be misinformed to by people like Róisín Murphy. So she'll probably go to jail.
Well, we come to that in a second. But before we do, I just wanted to say, I mean, it's precisely what you're talking about has happened in the Irish media over the last 5-10 years. Like, George Hook is gone, Kevin Myers is gone, Vincent Browne is gone. Now, Vincent retired, he wasn't cancelled. But the message went out clearly: if you step out of line, that's it, you're gone. And now we have the most boring commentary we've had in my lifetime. Like, there's basically no interesting or distinctive voices. I mean, Fintan O'Toole thinks he is, but he's been blathering the same stuff since 1982, so he ain't that special. But there's no distinctive voices, because they've all been extinguished by the fear that's been inculcated into them, and which the Electoral Commission, back to one of my famous transitions, back to what you're saying, the Electoral Commission wants to keep us a little bit afraid, because they've been given the powers, as I think you were about to mention, to shut people up in election times if they engage in misinformation.
What I think is fascinating about that is that, will that apply to political manifesto?
But like,
because
Fine Gael saying they'd abolish the USC, that sort of stuff.
Well, yeah, all of them. Like, how does one quantify? Like, so how would this commission, like, if a party writes a manifesto where they promise to do X, Y, and Z once entering government, and then they do, and they spend 3 weeks negotiating the program for government, and then when the program for government is released, the program for government doesn't feature X, Y, and Z, are they subject then to like, surely they then can be accused of misinforming the public?
No, well, that's not the intent. You know, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, you ask why particular laws are passed.
Intent.
Yeah, I know. Look, I'd love it. I mean, like, we all remember the Labour Party's every little Hertz Tesco ad. Remember? If you elect us, we will stop these, like, I can't remember what they were, but there were like 6 things. We'll stop them. And then every single one of them was implemented by them in government. They said they'd stop. It was, and they've never recovered from it. So, I mean, there's already a penalty for that kind of misinformation. They should be. But no, the intention of this, I mean, this is directed at stuff like immigration, and, you know, stuff that the politicians don't want to talk about. It's intended, like, I think it's explicitly intended to cool down those kind of conversations. It all comes back to Brexit and Trump, right? This is when misinformation was never a thing in our politics until we got Brexit and Trump, and the people voted the wrong way, and therefore they could only vote the wrong way because they were desperately misinformed. Therefore, we must make sure they are never misinformed again. But the objective of them not being misinformed is to make sure they never vote for anything like Brexit or Trump. So the misinformation is defined in the minds of the political establishment as things that might make you vote for a Brexity or Trumpy character. That's what it means. That's the definition, the working definition. It's not stuff like Paul Murphy saying, if we nationalize the banks and tax everyone 99%, it'll be a land of milk and honey. That's just political argument. Misinformation is make Ireland great again. That's misinformation. I think that's not how it's defined in the dictionary, or I'm sure officially, but that's the intent. Am I wrong?
But yeah, okay, fine. But, like, you know, misinformation during COVID, lots of it turned out to be true.
Well, this is it.
So like who? So this random group of people have been selected to sit on a committee to decide what is and isn't misinformation.
Well, you say
And
random.
like, well, we'll get to that in a sec. But like, but this isn't I'm not talking about, looking at the profiles of these people and thinking that they politically, do or don't disagree with my views on immigration or whatever. I'm saying that even the people that I think are the most in line with my views might select something as being misinformation today that turns out to be correct information later, or vice versa. You know what I mean? Like, there's nobody who can say for certainty, anything. Like, making those kind of decisions is absurd for anyone to be doing. And yes, it's part of things like immigration or whatever, but it's also part of, or will, and like, I'll try not to be too cynical that it's, because you and I have talked before about how, there's people who have conspiracy theories, and that ultimately where we fall away from that kind of thinking is that we don't think that most of the politicians we know are organized enough or can hold their water long enough to keep something like that a secret, that they can't. We're 1.73 billion into a children's hospital. I just don't think that they have the ability to mass organize some sort of universal conspiracy theory or conspiracy to overthrow or to introduce whatever. So like, yeah, like this, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist here, but like, it's very hard not to suspect from looking at this. This is also designed to shut down debate about things that aren't in line with an overall agenda for what certain people want Ireland to look like 10 years from now, ideologically, socially, etc.
Yeah,
and
completely.
Like, not just because they're afraid that some far right extremists might get elected to Europe or something like that, but also just because they don't want the hassle of people giving out about, like the transgender agenda being taught in schools.
Well, I think the bottom line is, like, Pat Leahy
had a
piece.
You know what I mean?
Pat Leahy had a piece this week about how they're not holding the referendum now on the women in the home referendum because they're afraid. And I mean, this is a quote from Pat Leahy's piece, that they'll be asked hard questions like how to define family or woman. I mean, that's true. And so Ben Scallon went along and asked one of them this week, how do you define
saw that.
How do you define? Like, yeah, it's not relevant. I mean, yeah, I think what it is they're afraid of these topics because they don't have answers to the questions. It's not because they think they're extremists. It's that they're afraid they know there's no logical answers to the question, so it's best not to have the question. But anyway.
But it was Catherine Martin, wasn't it? Catherine Martin, as a woman, a minister, a woman, for her to say that the definition of a woman is not relevant to a referendum.
On womanhood.
On womanhood, but also even if it wasn't, the definition of a woman is relevant for everything. Like, the fact that she could say that is just mind-boggling. This is a woman who's in government, a minister in our government. She doesn't think the definition of what a woman is relevant.
The funny thing
how does that work?
The question ain't going to go away. I'm going to keep getting Ben to ask it periodically in the run to the election, because I mean, they can keep trying to run from that question, but it's so funny the way they can't answer it. We're running short on time, Sarah, but before we go, I wanted to address something that the chairperson of the commission said this week, who's Miss Justice Marie Baker, who's sitting and serving member of the Supreme Court, who said, in relation to all of this, quote, "We're also going to have to learn how to deal with the balance between the right to freedom of expression on the one hand, and on the other hand, the right of persons not to be misinformed. We're going to have to balance those two rights." End quote. Only one of those is a right, Sarah. There's a right to freedom of expression in the Constitution. There's no right not to be misinformed. So she's balancing one of our constitutional rights against something that she appears to have thought up on a Tuesday morning. A right not to be misinformed. I mean, what? Where do you begin with that? I mean, like, if they start suggesting that there's a right not to be misinformed, then then that's really dangerous territory.
Also, John, you're misinformed all the time. I mean, advertising is misinformed. Burger King burgers don't look like that when you get them. Like, everything is misinformation. Like, to a degree. And so somebody deciding what is and isn't appropriate is troubling, to say the least. And it's not a right. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I should remind
single friends, like, the entire single scene is based on misinformation from what I hear. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, everything is misinformation.
I have to say now that
to be misinformed.
Back when I was single and used to very occasionally be on dating sites, I rarely answered that kind of body type question accurately. I think I was always just kind of like, they always had these really nice kind of, like they'd be slim, fit, and then they'd be kind of like cuddly,
husky,
and then they'd be like big. I was always kind of like, well, I can't say fit. Cuddly sounds a bit weird.
Yeah. Well, I was actually never on a dating website, but I've met men in person, so which this makes this even all the more audacious. But I'm 5'10", and you would be astounded at the amount of men who are 5'9" who tell you they're 6 foot.
Oh yeah,
astounded.
Yeah,
like men lie, men misinform, and I've seen it through friends of mine on dating websites. They lie about their height. And then I'd meet them and they'd be like, whoa, you must be like 6'3". And I'm like, no, you're just 5'9". Like, you know what I mean? So like, people misinform all the time. You don't have a right to not be misinformed. You ought to seek out information to inform yourself correctly, but you don't have a right to not be misinformed.
Yes. And it's I think it's demeaning to our democracy to suggest that people do. And also, the worst thing about it is, like, when you step back and look what's happening here, it's essentially putting guardrails around the democratic process to narrow the number of potential outcomes. To basically say that, yes, you can have your democracy, but only if we can tell you what the information is and you make appropriate decisions based on information that we've provided to you. And that way we can be fairly sure we won't have a Trump, or we won't have a Brexit, we won't have any of that unpleasant foreign stuff. That's the intent.
But then on the other hand, John, there was all this, I saw all this pearl clutching the other day, because Elon Musk there was a suggestion that Elon Musk was asking about when it's our next election, that he might intervene. Newsflash. Does anybody actually think that previous elections or referenda that we've had haven't been interfered with by the media or whatever, like with the slanted view? In your dreams, like, honest to God, do you honestly think there hasn't been interference with people who had an agenda? Get a grip of yourself. Second of all, what Elon Musk is or isn't suggesting, all he was doing was asking. But even if he was suggesting that Twitter would somehow get involved, they're just doing the opposite with this.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
And what's more, by the way, don't give me a break with these people being concerned with Elon Musk intervening. They would live for it. There's nothing the likes of Micheál Martin would like better than to stand up and give us a national sermon about how important it was that we were an independent democracy and Mr. Musk might have all the money in the world, but we'll make our own decision. Like, they would love that. Like, that bit of kind of grandstanding bullshit, they'll live for it.
I know, anyway. And Catherine Martin could stand up again and say, this just shows how important it is that we have an independent broadcaster like RT buy flip-flops and do nonsense. Yeah, exactly. like the whole, like, honestly, it's like, it more often than not these days, John, it's like parody.
It is.
It is. It's like a joke.
It is. Well, we'll have to leave it there because we've run over an hour. But like, and just to think, it's the last week of August. There hasn't been a whole lot of news. Imagine how much we have to talk about next week when there actually might be news. But it's a pleasure. I feel whole again having you back, Sarah. It's a long 3 weeks. Glad to have you back.
That's very nice.
Don't leave me again.
I won't.
Okay. Never leave. All right. Listen, thank you very much for listening, folks. It's a pleasure, as always, to be with you. Thank you so much for the feedback. I should say that my sister-in-law, Nicole, who's an avid listener to this show, was bereft at your absence, Sarah, and told me to tell you that it was barely worth listening to without you. So there you go.
Oh, thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was a compliment for you or having a cut at me, but I just thought I'd mention it.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
All right. Listen, thank you, everybody. From Sarah and from me, that was, once again, the week that really was. We'll see you this time next week.